Good evening, I'm Chris Cuomo. For our lead story tonight, we sifted through thousands of drug company documents, including these, that the public has never seen and was never meant to see. We're talking about the popular antidepressant Paxil, which now carries that black box warning that so many families say came too late. Those families want to know what the drug companies knew and when they knew it. Tonight, those families and you will get some answers.
Our beautiful little girl, Candace, died by hanging 4 days after ingesting 100 milligrams of Zoloft.
Matt violently and with great difficulty took his own life.
She ended the night by cutting her wrist.
At least 100 children have committed suicide and many others have attempted it while taking antidepressants.
I found Jacob hanging from the rafter in our attic.
It wasn't the disease that caused my daughter to viciously mutilate herself. It was the drug.
These parents believe the drug companies had evidence there was a risk, but never told them. Maybe if they had been warned, desperate situations might have been prevented.
This is 911. Who is this?
Listen to a call from a 10-year-old boy whose 14-year-old sister is on Paxil and trying to swallow a bottle of pills.
Where is your sister? What is she trying to do? Take pills?
What?
No,
my dad told me.
The family is suing. 2 months later, their mother calls 911 while fighting to keep Michelle from stabbing herself with scissors.
No, you're not going to No, you're not going to go today. Oh, no. Oh, no.
In 2002, 11 million antidepressant prescriptions were written for American children. The puzzling thing is that with the exception of Prozac, there's no research establishing the effectiveness of these drugs for kids with depression. So the question now is, could these drugs be harmful to children?
Primetime Live has discovered a new trail of documents from the makers of Paxil, GlaxoSmithKline. Look here. These papers show that as far back as 1997, some children taking Paxil in their own tests demonstrated suicidal behaviors. But patients were not warned. The company says the numbers were too small to be statistically significant.
Do you swear the testimony you are going to give is the truth?
But as we now know, Congress began investigating after it became clear that other companies had similar results. And families are wondering why the companies kept this information from the public.
I honestly do not know how the individuals responsible for this can even sleep at night. Now
Jennifer Tierney's daughter, Jamie, is still alive to talk about it. At age 15, she suffered from severe migraine headaches, making her anxious and withdrawn. Doctors thought the solution was an antidepressant, Effexor, and soon doubled her dose. Her parents say that changed her.
You think the drug was taking you over?
At the time, I thought it was everyone else.
How bad did it get?
I was thinking about suicide a lot and hurting myself.
You would think about this how?
I would think about how I would do it when I could actually do it and get away with it, you know, not be stopped like in the middle of it. I had gotten in a fight with my parents. I'm not sure what about. I don't remember. And I remember running upstairs and trying to slit my wrist with a razor blade.
Harvard psychiatrist Joseph Glenn Mullen consults for lawyers suing antidepressant manufacturers. He prescribes these drugs to patients but says he closely monitors them because he's seen extreme and dangerous reactions in some patients.
People who were not suicidal before I put them on the drug, who very clearly became agitated, sleepless, restlessness, and completely preoccupied with suicidal thoughts. And when I took them off the drug, it went away.
The vast majority of patients taking antidepressants don't have suicidal thoughts. But for families like the Tierneys, this isn't about the numbers. It's about the notification, having all the information available before putting their child on a potentially dangerous drug.
Had we been warned and known what to look for, we would have known immediately that Jamie was in trouble with this drug.
And parents say a warning is crucial because tragedy can strike in the blink of an eye. Julie Woodward was only 17 years old. She had recently switched high schools, and her parents say she was in a rebellious phase. Julie had been taking Zoloft for just 7 days when her father found her in the garage. Julie had hanged herself.
I just remember that moment, and I just said, no, God. And I just grabbed her and held her. I knew she was gone.
Before prescribing Zoloft, doctors actually tested Julie on a suicide severity scale, where she scored just 2 out of 5. She had thoughts of suicide, but no intent or plan.
We all have tremendous guilt that we would have given our child something that could have caused their death. And I just said we didn't know at the time.
The drug companies say there's no way to prove the drug and not the underlying depression causes these suicides. That said, a month after Julie's death, the maker of Zoloft published this report from 2 studies. In it, the company claims success in treating adolescent depression with Zoloft by combining the positive data from both studies. But here's the kicker. Individually, each of the studies conducted didn't have enough positive data to show effectiveness.
You just shouldn't have to feel this way anymore.
You may recognize the happy bouncing circle in this Zoloft commercial.
Depression may be related to an imbalance of natural chemicals between nerve cells in the brain. Prescription Zoloft works to correct this imbalance.
But wait a minute. Experts say there's no scientific proof that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance, even though many people claim to be helped by these drugs. And what's more, there's no way to precisely measure these chemicals in human brains. Instead, they test rats.
So you're telling me they fed rats some of these drugs, mixed their brains up in a tube, measured if there was more fluid than there was before, and that has started a cultural revolution of medicating behavior?
The bottom line, we don't really know what these drugs are doing in real live human beings.
Shame on you. The blood of these children is on your hands.
And families like those speaking at government hearings believe the drugs took their loved ones.
My son, Jacob Steinberg, died last year on Wednesday, July 23rd, after being on Paxil for about a month.
Many families are represented by Karen Barth Menzies of the Los Angeles law firm Baum Hedlund.
We represent over 100 families whose loved ones have committed suicide or they themselves have attempted suicide.
So let's take a closer look at the most surprising document we found. Even though Paxil's own studies failed to establish the effectiveness of the drug for kids with depression, this memo to the Paxil sales force describes Paxil as having remarkable efficacy and safety in the treatment of adolescent depression.
Yet in a letter to us, the company denied they promote the use of Paxil to treat depression in children or adolescents, as did the makers of Effexor and Zoloft. They also point out that during their pediatric trials, no one actually committed suicide. But to critics, that doesn't answer the questions raised by these documents.
When you look at all of the documents, you see a pattern of misleading doctors who then unwittingly mislead patients. This is a betrayal of the public trust in physicians behind the scenes by the industry, and it must stop.
As we continue our investigation, for the first time, you will now hear about another risk, the magnitude of which a drug company was unwilling to acknowledge for so long. You're about to meet 2 young women who say once you're on an antidepressant, it's hell to get off.
Manufacturers call it discontinuation.
Zap, zap, zap. It feels like electricity in the back of your head. It feels like your brain is actually seizing up.
Some patients call it agonizing withdrawal.
My whole body would be shaking as though my nervous system is on the fritz.
Primetime's investigation discovered evidence that the makers of Paxil withheld information, this time downplaying the risks of withdrawal symptoms from their own studies. Symptoms range from mild temporary headaches to debilitating electric shock sensations. Paxil is not the only antidepressant which can cause sometimes severe side effects. The Los Angeles law firm Baum Hedlund says they represent 3,000 American clients, claiming the makers of Paxil withheld the facts about withdrawal.
It's been too bad of a drive so far this afternoon, with just the exception of northbound I-15. That's
one of them is Tara McMullen, a radio traffic reporter in Utah. She started taking Paxil 9 years ago to cope with her divorce. Diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, she says Paxil helped.
I thought that people take, those types of medications to get through traumatic times in their lives, whether it's a divorce or change job or move, and then you can just simply stop taking it when you don't need it anymore.
But she says she couldn't stop. Paxil instructions recommend a gradual reduction in dose, but Tara says reducing didn't solve the problem. It just brought on new symptoms.
And it literally felt like somebody had a nail on top of my head pushing it down.
She even switched to a controlled release version of Paxil, but says she broke out in this rash. Tara says she just can't quit.
I'll do anything to get the drug back just so that I can work the next day, so the headache can go away, so I can think clearly and be able to perform whatever it is I need to do with my life.
That's not that unusual, says psychiatrist Joseph Glenn Mullen, author of The Antidepressant Solution.
If I get a bottle of Paxil and I look at the label, will I see, be careful, when you stop taking this, you may have withdrawal-like symptoms?
You won't see that on the bottle, which is where you should see it. No.
But doctors are told that now.
No. Doctors are told, oh, our drugs don't cause withdrawal. They cause something called discontinuation syndrome, but that's transient and mild. Don't worry about it too much.
It wasn't until December 2001 that this precaution about discontinuation was added to the package insert. Before then, millions of prescriptions were sold without a warning or precaution on the insert. Only brief mentions in the back about reports of withdrawal symptoms.
Now Primetime has obtained an internal document from 1997 showing that in some studies, the number of people taking Paxil who experienced withdrawal symptoms was shockingly high. We found 25%, 42%, even as high as 62%. But these numbers were not included in the warning given to doctors or patients. And take a look at these documents, directing sales reps to minimize concerns about discontinuation, to try to even avoid using the word withdrawal, and to not focus on how often these effects occur. And maybe this document provides the simplest explanation of why this company wanted to downplay discontinuation. Do you believe that the decision of some companies not to reveal negative data is about science or sales?
Oh, this is about money. This is not about science. The pharmaceutical industry has systematically misled physicians and patients.
Congressman Henry Waxman is on the committee investigating the antidepressant manufacturers. Until we met with him, he wasn't aware these withdrawal documents even existed.
What we need to know is what the test showed, not just what the drug companies want us to know about the test, because they want to tell us the positive information and suppress or downplay the negative.
That's exactly what Congress was investigating this fall.
I am David Wheaton, Senior Vice President for U.S. Regulatory Affairs at GlaxoSmithKline.
They brought in representatives from all the antidepressant manufacturers, including the makers of Paxil.
And that's why part of the goal is to get this information out to the general population as well as physicians.
By putting a host of very confounded data on a patient label about negative studies, that could potentially do more harm than good.
Withdrawal wasn't covered at the hearing. Families involved call the company's responses stonewalling.
Well, I call on them to open up their files now so we know what's going on.
And demand more answers, more accountability. The makers of Paxil say they've provided adequate and complete warnings to physicians about the risks of withdrawal. In a letter to Primetime, they suggest discontinuation isn't a major concern because for most who experience it, the symptoms are mild to moderate and generally they go away within 2 weeks. But then, in the same letter, the company admits that in their own studies, as many as 21% of people taking Paxil experience symptoms potentially associated with withdrawal. That's a much higher number and a much higher risk than the 2% or greater figure they put in the package insert.
I really would have liked to have known that this was going to happen to me and given my consent and weighed the risks and the positive and the negative, and is it worth it?
The women you've just heard from tell us they're still seeking the peace they hoped the drugs would provide. And just this week, British medical authorities gave makers of antidepressants another blow. An official recommendation that young adults ages 18 to 30, not just children or teens, should be very closely monitored when starting the drugs.